a lot of experience, but they may not be any good. Look, nobody's suggesting that when we interview somebody, the only thing we're going to look at is experience. The problem is thinking, I really like this guy. He seems really sharp. What a great communicator. Oh, by the way, does he have any project management experience? No, he doesn't. Well, then how can you predict how good a project manager he's going to be? Well, I just think he's good. I'm going with my gut. No offense, but we can't afford to hire people in today's world based on somebody's gut. So we want somebody you like and somebody who's a good communicator. And oh, by the way, we want them to have proven they've been a good project manager, right?
Right.
So look, our recommendation, okay, regarding communication are always about observing behavior, okay? We all make too much, too often about all the subtleties that are out there, the hidden messages, the baggage associated with communication, right? And by the way, when you do projects at work, you don't go home and then use project software at home, right? You don't. So what do we do at work and at home? We both communicate.
Some of us.
Yeah, some of you do. Some of you. And that's why you're so effective and why you're the CEO.
Yeah, right.
That's why I work for you, right? Whereas you go to work and you communicate. You go home and you communicate. And people think, well, so it's the same. So I'm a good communicator at home, so I'm a good communicator at work. Not necessarily. Or it's the same lessons, it's the same situations. In a way it is, but we take the wrong lessons away from it. So whether it's email behavior or face-to-face communication, we have specific recommendations for how to understand other people's tendencies. And then, based on that, we make recommendations for how to change your behavior to increase the other person's comprehension of you and reduce your conflict. Notice what we said. We're going to want you to change your behavior. We're going to show you a simple analysis tool, something to look for when you talk to other people. And it's a little bit hard to talk to another person and think about how they're behaving, but you can do it, okay? But we're going to recommend you look, pay attention, analyze, and then change your behavior, because if you're not willing to change your behavior, you can turn off this cast now, because nothing that is going to happen in terms of you improving your skills happens without you changing your behavior. That's the nature of change, right?
Yeah.
For instance, when it comes to email, we recommend looking at tendencies like how long or how short the email is, what words they use, what punctuation they use, do they include attachments? For face-to-face communications at the conference, we teach techniques like verbal clues. What words do they use? Vocal clues. How do they say those words? And then visual clues, their facial expressions, their body language, and so on. So we teach all this stuff because you are surrounded by a sea of communication behavior every day. And if you'll just spend a little bit of time with it, you'll get good at it really fast.
Good. So there's a lot of detail that we cover. It's a whole day conference. It's, again, like the Effective Management Conference. It's a 2-day conference. We've really whittled down to 1 day, but it's a full 1 day. Ask anybody who's been to one. But
yeah,
so we can't obviously cover that all today. So today let's talk a little bit about some DISC basics, and that's the whole assertive or reserved and people or task.
Yes. So the DISC model simplifies our thinking about communication. It suggests the two simple discriminators we've already talked about to help characterize what we experience when we're communicating with other people. The first is whether somebody tends to be assertive or reserved behaviorally. And what would the assertive be? They tend to talk fast. They tend to talk loud. They tend to talk faster or louder than other people. These are thought of as assertive behaviors. For those of you who know DISC, those are the D's and I's of the world. But again, you don't need to know DISC to have this help you. Okay? Do they speak more slowly than someone else? Do they speak less loudly than other people? Do they have pauses, right? That would be seen as tending toward reservedness. Okay? S's and C's for those of you who know DISC. The second behavioral tendency is whether somebody tends to be people or task focused. People-focused folks tend to talk more about themselves and about other people. We joke that high I's, like me, unfortunately, are famous for saying, enough about me, what do you think about me? Right? So people-focused folks talk about themselves and other people, and they engage in behaviors that many of us would describe as friendly or warm. They touch other people. They ask how they're doing. They share stories. They use other people's names. They ask questions to engage the other person and then respond to the other person and tell a story that makes themselves and others look good. Okay? Task-focused people, on the other hand, tend to be more focused on tasks, on work. They talk about processes and systems. They talk about what they need to do rather than who they need to talk to. That's one of my favorites. At a meeting, a task-focused person, if they came out of a meeting and described it, they would say what got accomplished, what decisions were made. A people-focused person would say who was there and who said what to whom about someone else.
And the answer wouldn't be the CEO.
Yeah,
It'd be
yeah.
Bob Jones.
That's right. Yeah.
Right?
If a people person talked about somebody, they would talk about the person. They would say Bob or Terry or Jane. If a task-focused person were talking about it, they would say the role. They would say CEO or EVP. Yeah, the VP said X, or yeah, that VP from HR said this or that.
The people-focused person would go, well, what was his name? It's like,
Yeah,
I don't know.
I don't know. He's just a VP of HR. That's all you need to know, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And again, for those of you who know, the D's and C's are on the task side of the equation, and I's and S's are on the people side. Okay, that's just some simple background, whether you're familiar with DISC or not, to help you think about the behaviors of other people with whom you're interacting. If you'll think about a range of behaviors between assertive and reserved, and on a different axis, a perpendicular axis, a range of behaviors between people and task foci, if you will, it makes it easier to think about the thousands or really millions of behaviors thrown out every day. This is a basic template to categorize, to organize the behaviors that happen in front of you all day.
Right. Now, you mentioned a whole bunch of behaviors in there around assertiveness, right? How fast they talk, all those kind of things.
The problem is we used to teach that. I know where you're going. You're going to say, well, there's 50 of them, right? I just had 50 of them in a conversation, and people don't realize it. I think at one of our recent conferences, we had a group of 2 people. We had 2 people counting behaviors in 3 minutes, and they came up with over 130. Yeah. Folks, if you don't think there's enough behaviors, in 2 minutes at the conference, you'll learn how to count 100 plus, which is enough to draw a good enough map to be pretty confident about what the behavior and therefore the conclusion you're going to draw, which allows you then to change your own behavior back. Okay.
Right.
So the point though is all these behaviors are happening all at once, and I've tried to teach that. I said you need to look for this and this and this and this and this and this, and people's eyes glaze over. Right.
Right.
The problem is you can't give people that much. They can't do it, and that's okay. The question is, what can people handle? What people can handle is a few simple discriminators that helps move people in one direction or the other. And the first one is, and when it comes to assertiveness, is how quickly they talk or how slowly they talk after you talk. People notice that. In fact, people have an emotional response to people. A lot of people have an emotional response to being interrupted, right? So the question is,
particularly if they're reserved.
Yeah, exactly.
Like if I interrupt you, you don't care. You can care less.
Keep talking when I'm talking. I don't care as long I can listen to you while I'm talking. I'm a really good talker, by the way.
Exactly.
And as long as we're talking about me, it's fine. I hate saying that. It's embarrassing. So it's as simple as this. There's a simple way to assess whether somebody is more or less assertive in general, okay? I know you could argue, I don't know what the mean of assertiveness is. Don't worry about that. The simple question you want to ask is, do they interrupt you or do they tend to pause after you've spoken and before they begin talking? So, as you're talking with someone, a simple tool, pay attention to how quickly they talk after you've spoken. Do they start talking before you're done? Separate from your emotional response to being interrupted, or the fact that you know they had to be thinking of what they were going to say before they started talking. If they start talking before you're finished, then they were really not listening a long time before you were done. Separate your emotional response to their behavior from an analysis of their behavior. Are they interrupting you? Okay? Or do you notice that they wait for you to finish before they talk?
So if somebody starts talking, like the fraction of a second you've completed your sentence, have I interrupted you or have I paused?
What do you mean a fraction of a second?
So just a second ago, you said a sentence, right?
Yeah.
And you said the word talk. And literally within probably 1/20th of a second, I started talking. Is that an interruption?
No, I would say it's assertive though.
It's assertive.
Yeah, because they're thinking about what they're going to say. There's not a pause. The question is, interrupting or pause are 2 extremes, right? In the middle, if there is no pause, it's not a pause, but it would tend toward the assertive side because they're thinking about what they're going to say before that you're
right. I would have had to, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
okay.
And people do this all the time. And it's simple. Rather than getting upset at them, just know you can interrupt them more and it won't bother them. I don't know why. People get their feelings hurt and they shut down. Well, sorry, the people who are assertive don't mean to hurt your feelings. In fact, they probably don't care about your feelings. They just talk fast. They don't consider it an affront. They don't consider you talking slowly necessarily an affront either, okay? Now look, just notice, do they wait or do they tend to interrupt? And count up in the course of a conversation how many times they interrupt or how many times they wait. Okay, if you get to more than 5 to 10 interruptions, they're an assertive person. Generally speaking, it's one of the clues. It's not the only thing, because all of us have assertiveness and reserved in us. All of us have people and task tendencies among us. We have all types of tendencies, but they're to a greater or lesser degree. And as you gather more and more data about someone, and if it's a coworker, you're going to have plenty of time over the course of a week to get all kinds of interactions with them. All you have to do is pay attention and count, and you're going to be able to count very, very quickly. Now, the first few times you do this, it's going to be a little harder than you thought. It's hard, as we teach people at the conference, it's hard to both be in a conversation and then analyze that conversation at the same time. And by the way, one of the things we recommend as a general rule is, rather than always trying to do this when you're talking to somebody, do it when you're in a meeting with them and they're talking to somebody else. You can watch them interact with somebody else for 5 minutes and probably gather 5 or 10 examples of interrupting or reserved. I mentioned this before. Look, get over your emotional response to their tendency to be too slow or too fast. If you're naturally a fast talker or an interrupter, you may well get frustrated with the other person's slowness, okay? That may seem to you to be not on top of things or not quick or even not smart, okay? But look, Mike tends to be not an interrupter, but if you ever doubt that Mike's smart, you're mistaken, okay? On the opposite side of the scale, don't consider somebody rude just because they interrupt you. I mean, they might be, but let's not judge them, okay? Because rudeness is a characterization that has emotional content. The fact that they interrupt is just a fact. That's all it is. And what we want to do is count facts, and behaviors are facts, okay? If you're naturally somebody who pauses, don't think of the other person who interrupts you as impolite or not listening or not respectful. Look, folks, these two sides of this example are the very kind of psychologizing mistakes we're trying to avoid by focusing on analyzing behavior rather than judging the intent or emotions behind them. Saying that somebody's not listening is a judgment. Saying somebody is impolite is a judgment. It's judgment, right? Judge not lest ye be judged, right? Saying someone's not respectful is not behavior. It's a conclusion you've drawn. It's like saying, well, that kid didn't do well on that test, so he's stupid. Well, the fact is he got a low score on the test. It doesn't make him stupid, okay? And that's where a big problem with discrimination happens. It's not what people actually do. It's the labels we put on them that's such a problem. Okay,
right. So then what do we do with this information now that we have it? We've paid attention. We know whether they tend to interrupt or whether they tend to pause. So now what do we do with that?
Well, there's really two things. One is keep track of it. Make it a habit to pay attention to it and look for data that will help you begin to develop a map of behaviors that give you clues about other people, particularly if you know your DISC profile or somebody else's, but again, you don't need to. Okay, but that's kind of longer term, right? Building a map of is this person an interrupter or not or whatever. But you can use this right away within 2 minutes of a conversation. This is it. I defy anybody to find lots of places or even a few places where they can, in a few minutes, learn a specific behavioral technique that somebody else uses and then know how to address it in the course of 2 minutes of a conversation. Look, if somebody tends to interrupt you when they talk and you're an interrupter yourself, in other words, it would be D&I talking to another D&I, for instance. Folks, you can continue to interrupt that person and you won't be hurting your interactions with them. Now, if somebody tends to interrupt you and you don't, you again could do so. You could interrupt them without any detraction from your conversation with them. They won't ding you because you interrupt them. If they're an interrupter, they're okay with you interrupting them. Okay?
Okay, if they're an interrupter and you're not, you could interrupt them more.
Right.
But to you, that might be, if you're not the interrupter, that may feel rude. So
yeah. Actually, it doesn't feel rude. It feels different, and you're judging yourself as being rude.
Exactly.
It doesn't feel rude. It feels different. And then you say different is bad because what I was doing before was good. I'm self-loathing at the moment, so I'm going to say I'm rude.
So even though you think even though you're putting this characterization of rudeness on it, the fact is, if you interrupt the other person more,
they don't think it's rude.
Well, I think it goes beyond that. They may actually think it's better.
Yeah, look, it's actually advisable to move towards, if you're not an interrupter and you're talking to somebody who's interrupting, it's actually advisable for you to move towards more interrupting of them to reduce the differences in your communication tendencies and increase, sounds corny, to increase the harmony in the conversation. If you want to be more successful in your interactions with this person, adopting some of